on Zoom.
Neighboring universities like UCSD, and we all kind of stay within the same San Diego area. So we want to be a community that can help parents, and whether they're newborns all the way to college graduates. So we're here to help, especially during these trying times. I want to welcome everybody who's putting out their schools: Montgomery, Olympian, see Hilltop. It's in all the elementary school parents. And I also want to remind everyone that this is a webinar setting, so we do not use our mics at all. We're here and we can ask questions for Dr. Appel as the presentation is going to start. And we can ask questions on the Q&A, and it's right below your screen. Please ask your questions. All questions will be answered by Dr. Appel. If not after the session, he will take those questions home and respond to everyone, and we will send that information and those responses back to you. So feel free to write down your question. If you have other questions for me or for Ms. Simmons, you can also ask questions there. We want to document all your questions because that really helps our district cater your professional development and the type of needs that you have out there, so we can better address that, not just at our district, but at every school site. So, so I really appreciate that from everyone and your feedback as well. We have one more minute. Anna, do you want to go through the interpretation piece of it real quick before we get started?
Yes, I'm just gonna request to share the screen with Dr. Appel.
I jumped the gun, Anna. I
No,
jumped it.
no
Please get rid of this stuff.
No problem. Welcome to everyone. I will go over the interpretation quickly, and I will do this in Spanish. Bienvenidos a todos a la serie de Primavera 2021 de la Universidad de Padres de Sweetwater, UCSD. El día de hoy vamos a hablar de el cerebro del adolescente y vamos a tener otras dos sesiones más, una la semana que entra el 9 y la tercera y última el 16 de febrero. Y si están aquí, cualquier pregunta sobre dónde se encuentran los documentos, esos son los enlaces y también los podemos poner en el chat. Y en la parte inferior de su pantalla deben de tener un mundito. Si ustedes hacen clic al mundo, como se ven en la presentación, pueden accesar la interpretación al español. En su pantalla va a decir inglés o español. Escojan español. Y si ustedes no quieren escuchar el audio del intérprete competir con el del presentador, porque van a estar oyendo a dos personas hablar al mismo tiempo, les recomendamos que silencien al audio original para que puedan escuchar nada más al intérprete. Y these are what your screen looks like if you need interpretation from your computer. And I am going to, this is what your screen will look like if you are connecting with a cell phone. Si se están conectando con un celular, es importante que escojan llamar por internet, call over internet, para que puedan tener audio. And this also applies to any of you who are here connecting with your cell phone. Sometimes if you skip the step of call over internet, you won't hear the presenter, everything will be muted, so you have to disconnect and connect again. Después en la parte de la derecha van a ver tres puntitos y si estos están conectados con un celular y van a escoger language interpretation. One more thing before I return the mic to Dr. Appel. If you are connected with a cell phone and not a computer, sometimes Zoom does not recognize your name. It will record your phone number. And so if you are connecting with a cell phone, we ask that kindly that you enter and type your name on the chat to help us know that you're here. Si están conectados con un celular, Zoom a veces no reconoce quién es usted, entonces les pedimos que por favor, si están conectados con un celular, escriban su nombre en el chat. Eso nos va a asistir a nosotros, a ayudar para tomar asistencia. Muchas gracias, and I give the mic back to Dr. Abel.
All right, thank you, and welcome everybody once again. And as always, on behalf of the university, I want to thank all of you, not only for taking an hour out of your day, and I know that is a lot to ask of you, and you should know that you are wonderful role models for your kids, because not only are they attending Zoom school, so are you. But I really do appreciate not only the time that you spend, but you're welcoming me and welcoming us into your homes and your communities as we try to navigate this labyrinth of remote learning together. And one of the things that I think that we are seeing is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel is long and the light may be dim, but we are definitely getting there. And really the only way that we are going to get there is together. So this investment that you are making, I cannot tell you how grateful I am, and I certainly do hope that some of your elementary kids and preschool kids, middle school kids, and high school kids will one day wind up at our campus, where we can continue to provide a supportive and welcoming environment. And here we are again for our second round of Parent University. And again, as always, the theme is going to be heads, hearts, and hands. Now, last time we talked about the brain, we talked about socio-emotional characteristics, we talked about remote learning, and now we're going to go a little bit deeper, and we're going to explore the mystery of the adolescent brain. And thereafter, we will look at adolescent behavior and see how all of those things are connected as we help them better prepare for a bright future in whatever lies ahead, whether that be in a career development or helping them get to where they want to go in post-secondary education. So definitely buckle your safety belts. We are going to study the mysteries of the adolescent brain. Now, I know this has been mentioned before, but this will be up at my SlideShare account. And for those of you who may have had an opportunity to peruse it, you'll see that there's a little under 4,000 different presentations and resources. You may also find some French recipes. Those aren't mine, but I think that they are pretty good. So definitely, if you've gone too far, try them out. Now, there's going to be time for comments and questions at the end of the presentation. And if you were here for our first offing, you can certainly ask questions that may be holdovers from them. And please rest assured that if we don't get to you today, Ms. Simmons and Ms. Delgado arrange a spreadsheet of questions for me, and I respond to them as quickly as possible and have them sent back. So I want to make sure your questions are answered. If you would like, you're always welcome to email me at this address, and you can send questions either in English or in Spanish, and I will attend to them directly. So let's go back to Parent University recurring themes. We're really very serious about this because this really builds from knowledge we had from ancient times all the way up to today's most modern neuroscience, is that we want to be able to provide support that is good for the heart, meaning there's an emotional investment, an emotional connection, good for the head, intellectual harmony, as well as good for what we call being good for the hands. And that has to do with behavior. And I think that you will see in all of these workshops and all of these sessions, we attend to each of these, hopefully with a good deal of fidelity. And what you will see is that high performance is really in the middle of all of that, where you see all of those intersect as high performance. And we're not solely speaking in terms of academic performance, although certainly that is a benefit. We're also speaking in terms of quality of life, self-assurance, self-confidence, resilience, and all of those things that not only help us succeed in school or on the job, but also life in general. This time around, as I mentioned, we are going to explore adolescence, tweendom and teendom. We're going to look today at the adolescent brain. Next Tuesday, we are going to look at adolescent behavior and emotions, and then look at a very specific part of emotional development that centers around academic motivation and preparation for college, and what are those metacognitive and skills and emotional intelligence that you need to move forward. And certainly we're going to look at these in the context of a return to school in some form, a return to campus in some form. A lot of the research that is emerging talks about the next hurdle to get over socio-emotionally. We know that when we had the sort of jarring transition from in-person schooling to remote learning, it was the instability that proved vexing and bedeviling for our students. Now we know that the same thing, they've settled into it. They may not exactly love it, but they've at least sort of settled into the rhythm of remote learning, and there's a greater sense of stability. And as we look towards a return to campus in some form, be it, part-time or blended or hybrid, we want to make sure that we can put our best feet forward in doing that. And luckily, hopefully, this time we will have a longer runway to do this. So as we talk about academic motivation and preparation for college, we're also talking about preparation for the return to campus, hopefully in the not too distant future. Now, I want to tell you, and this may be a secret revealed about me, that I was not born aged 53. Some people have said you must have been an old baby, but I actually used to be an adolescent. And what you are looking at is a picture of me at that time. This was 1983. And my adolescence was fraught with angst and confusion, everything you could imagine from the teenage years, amplified and magnified. I was just a horrible, horrible teen. This is, again, 1983, and I was as sullen and surly as you might imagine. And I really could barely see the next day, much less far into the future. And I think we're really talking about that now, and we're talking about the adolescent brain, and we're talking about our cognitive development. So what do we mean by that? And we have an idea about how the brain grows, how the brain develops, and we'll take a closer look at that. But what does this mean in practical terms? And certainly, if you're up for a game in the chat, you can guess which one of these fine lads that I am. I don't know if you receive extra credit for it, but you can certainly have a go. All right, so some of you may remember, if you're as old as me or older, a movie called Ferris Bueller's A Day Out. This was a movie with Matthew Broderick and some others about Ferris Bueller. And one of the pranks that Ferris Bueller got up to on his day away from school was to take out his friend's father's Ferrari. And this is a wonderfully apt metaphor for the teenage brain. And I think that the popular perception about the adolescent brain is that it's an adult brain, but without so many miles on the odometer. Not quite, although it is developing and although it is growing, you really can't think of it like that. You can think of the adolescent brain as like a Ferrari with an amazing potential for speed, amazing potential for precision. But if you think about giving your teenager permission to drive a Ferrari, it's really this, they're in the same boat with their super brains. Their brains at this age have a lot of power and a lot of potential with an experienced driver at the cognitive wheel. So they have more than they know what to do with, and they are sort of figuring it out. And you can almost think of it as, you know, the things that they get up to is taking the cognitive car out without permission. So one way to think about that. What else do we know about the adolescent brain? And this comes from the National Institutes for Mental Health. We know that the brain reaches its largest size during adolescence. Girls are around age 14, and you can talk think about this in terms of maturity, the way that people interact with one another, performance and school, etc. And even when the brain completes its major growth, and really this happens, I would say probably late 20s, 28, the prefrontal cortex is the last region to mature. And remember, that is the one that controls emotions, that is the place where good decision-making is to be had and socialization. It still continues to grow, but just not in the same way that it did during early adolescence or as toddlers. Now, the great thing about the teenage brain, we know that it's at its peak, it's at its apex, it's primed and ready to learn. This is where we talk about plasticity, and we'll look at plasticity in just a section. But immersion and challenging academic and creative activities facilitate growth during this time. So you can think of these activities and opportunities for creativity as sort of like prime fuel to put in the supercar of a brain that they have. We also know that many mental disorders appear during adolescence, especially things like anxiety, depression, bipolar, and eating disorders. And that has to do with the growth of the brain and major brain changes. And we know, and I think we had a good look at this that the last time around, is that teenage brains may be more vulnerable to stress. And imagine you're sort of in the middle of construction. The adolescent brain is in the middle of major development, and as such may respond to stress differently. Remember that the part of the brain that controls emotions is growing more quickly than the part of the brain that dampens them. So our responses to stress may be different than the way an adult would or a toddler would be. We know that teens need more sleep than do adults, and we're talking about 9 to 10 hours. And this has to do with melatonin, which is a hormone that readies us for sleep when it's dark. And the circadian rhythm of sleep from day to night is altered, and we have a delayed release of melatonin. So that is why you may see teens going to bed later and waking up later. So it's important to remember that teens do need more sleep. We talked last series of sessions technology devices and how it keeps teens awake and the importance of putting devices at bay. Now, we know that teen brains may be more vulnerable to stress. We know that mental disorders appear during this time as well. But we also know one thing about the teen brain is that it is remarkably resilient. And we know that some of the changes that may make the brain more vulnerable also may protect against mental disorders and also provide an opportunity to nip things in the bud and attend to them directly. So this is just a little bit about getting familiar. Now, if you remember from our previous series, we have a three-parted brain. We called it the triune brain. And the way that we respond to our environment, and we can certainly explore that a little more, is the sort of dynamic interplay between these ancient structures, how we attend to things emotionally and rationally and out of the survival instinct. And if you remember from that time, our lizard brain, the rule here being that the deeper you go into the brain, the more primitive the structure. Call it the lizard brain because we talk about it in the context of the great reptiles and dinosaurs, but actually was the earliest fossilized version of this we see in fish. But this is our brainstem and our cerebellum. This is our autopilot, remember, controls things like breathing, but this is also where our survival mechanism lives, this the fight, flight, or freeze, also sort of the location where you might find things like post-traumatic stress, anxiety disorders, etc. Along the evolutionary line, we then develop the limbic system with the mammalian brain that we share in common with most mammals, great and small. This is where our emotions are. This is where memories are. This is where habits and attachments are. And remember, at this time, the time of adolescence, the limbic system is growing a lot more quickly than is the prefrontal cortex, which actually sort of dampens and helps us control our emotions. And then again, we have the human brain, or what we call the neocortex. This is the most human part of the human brain, where things like language, abstract thought, imagination, consciousness, reasoning, and rationalizing come from. And it's really sort of not part and parcel of, some of the other mammals. So again, the triune brain is in a major construction during this time of adolescence. And a lot of this also has to do with learning. And we didn't really talk too much about learning last session, but given that the brain is developing quite rapidly, it may be of use to understand how the brain learns, especially at this age. We tend to have about over 100 billion nerve endings in the brain that process sensory information. And when I say sensory information, I mean, the five senses, unless of course you're M. Night Shyamalan and there may be a sixth sense, but generally sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch. And we get information that comes into us immediately, and we have to start to make sense of it. And the way we do that is when we're engaged in active learning, when we're paying attention, when our brains deem it survival necessary, we see that these nerve endings create bridges across them, and they grow closer and they create synapses and eventually neural networks or pathways. And you can think of it almost like a tennis net or knitting crochet. And as you learn more, those ties are strengthened and the weave becomes stronger. We talked a little bit about neuroplasticity. And when we talk about neuroplasticity, we're talking about how we reorganize these neural pathways during the brain. And we're capable of doing so throughout the entirety of our lives. And we know that when we learn things or we memorize new information, that's where we see long-lasting or functional changes in the brain. We maintain plasticity throughout our lifespan. We can always learn new things. We can always adjust. And the way that these changes come together, the way that these connections come together is neuroplasticity. Now, it should be mentioned that as we age, we have somewhat less plasticity. So the question being, can you teach an old dog new tricks? Yes, you certainly can do so, but inevitably it is going to take longer and it will probably annoy the dog and it will probably annoy you. We've seen this graph before, and you can see here about the brain's ability to change in response to experience and the amount of effort that the change requires. And we can see very clearly that when we are at our youngest, 3 to 4, this is when we are able to change in response to experiences without a whole lot of effort. This is why We want to learn languages at a young age. We want to learn good habits at a young age. We want to start to really solidify our identities and resilience at a young age. And you will see between the ages of 10 and 20 are really what we're talking about in terms of adolescence. And as we age, it requires a lot more effort for our brains to change and toward the goal of neuroplasticity. Interestingly, the emerging circuitry that makes teenagers vulnerable to risky behavior and mood swings, those things with which we are very familiar and those things which we will speak about in greater depth next session, also confer a significant advantage on adolescent learners, because remember, the brain is growing and is more receptive to learning and show faster learning curves than do adults. So you have an amazing opportunity to take advantage of that, but it's really sort of threading a very fine needle where you have sort of an interest in risk-taking behaviors, and part of that is to add to our knowledge base, but we know that teenagers tend to learn more quickly and are more receptive. It's just creating the right environment, and that is incumbent upon not solely educators or parents alone, but all of us working together to really help plasticity's last great stand, because you will see as we age and we head towards 70, that changes. When we look at adolescent brain scans, what we see is that our reward systems mature well before inhibitory systems. When we talk about reward systems, if you remember us talking about the neuroscience of persistence and avoidance, and we'll take another look at that. But this also speaks to our limbic system developing more quickly than the part of the brain that controls the limbic system or controls the amount of emotions. So another way to look at it, and another thing to think about as we move forward in supporting our tweens and our teens. When we talk about things like risk and reward, we can better understand levels of emotion during adolescence when we look at evolution. And what we know is that from way back in our existence, emotions really were the way that we connect with others. And you can see this in some of the early work by Darwin, which talks about emotional intelligence among animals, and looking at a predator response and being able to recognize that as a threat to survival. But certainly we connect with other humans through emotions. One of the things that we know is that learning with emotion tends to be the learning that sticks, and that emotionally charged experiences also prove to be important learning tools. And those are the things that we tend definitely not to forget. We know that, interestingly, risky behavior at this age taps into the same systems of reward, irrespective of the type of risk taken. So this is to say that the brain does not make a distinction between, joyriding or, something like taking a test. It really sort of plugs in to the same system. And remember, the brain is survival based, and we receive neurochemical rewards for those behaviors we enact that contribute to our survival. And that is what we call the neurochemistry of experience. So remember, positive feelings about a learning experience, even if it is a learning experience that emerges from risky behavior, produce endorphins, and that gives us a sense of euphoria, and also dopamine, which stimulates the prefrontal cortex. That encourages us to repeat the behavior, because what the brain is sensing is that we have solved a problem in a dynamic environment, and we want to continue to solve this problem and even greater problems. So if we feel good about something, we are likely to continue to do it. And if we think about this in terms of the classroom, you can imagine if you are in class and you are participating and you feel as though you are accepted and that you are a valuable member of the class and that you are engaged in new and interesting things, chances are you are going to keep coming back and coming back, coming back. And if you take a risk, and we can talk about risk in an academic sense of the word risk, that you try something and you succeed, or you try something and you're supported. If you don't succeed, you will probably keep coming back and trying other things, which is really sort of cultivating a love of learning. Now, conversely, we know that negative feelings about a learning experience produce noradrenaline or norepinephrine and cortisol, and that puts the brain into survival mode and causes anxiety. So you can imagine in a class, especially when you are a teenager, and I think it is safe to say, without treading too far down the path into behaviors, is that teens truly look outwardly for approval and inwardly for blame, and the most important authority figures for them during this time are their peers. So if you are in an environment where you may not feel accepted by your peers, if you are in a class where you're really lost and you don't see a way of coming back from it, or if you are worried about a bully, or if you are worried about your parents, or if you are worried about any number of things, you are going to avoid those places that make you feel like this. And remember, when we talk about the surge of adrenaline and cortisol and what it's like to be in survival mode, we know that that can leave us feeling both mentally and physically exhausted. So physically, we may feel as though the blood has drained from us. We may feel nauseous. We may feel headachy. We may feel cold. Mentally, we feel exhausted, that all of our energies have been put into this one event. That quite obviously, coming from that would be the neuroscience of avoidance, where you are going to actively avoid situations like this. Now, let's put it into context. When we know that the limbic system in the teenage brain is sort of in a state of flux, is developing quite rapidly, not only may we not able to control our emotions or dampen our emotions, we may not be able to understand them. So I think we've all had situations where the words are leaving our mouths before we can even have a chance to think about this. And this is this really also has to do with things like executive function that helps us lengthen the fuse, so to speak, make good decisions, and that type of thing. And we know that this can be magnified or amplified through social media and gaming, as we discussed in our last sessions. There are a lot of things to think about for the teenage brain. Now, this is the teenage brain really, in the best of times, in the best of circumstances, evolutionary throughout the ages. If you think about the circumstances in which we find ourselves, there are added stressors, and we mentioned before that the teenage brain may be particularly vulnerable to stressors as it grows. So you really do have a perfect storm of adolescence that really may help to help you understand some of the things that you are seeing, and consider perhaps if you see behaviors that are magnified or amplified or uncharacteristic. So let's probe a little bit more deeply. When we think about the teenage brain, we know that the adolescent brain is more sensitive to neurochemical rewards than is the adult brain. So the experiences that teenagers have, they may actually feel a greater sense of reward and a greater sense of achievement just because the neurochemical rewards react differently. They are stronger. And of course, this helps to make them better learners. So you can think of, and I actually can go back to my teenage years. And I was not a star student at the time. In fact, I was at risk of being kicked out of my high school, but luckily I had the opportunity to go to a community college over the summer, which really sort of changed my perspectives in quite a while. But I did have one class to which I would always return, and that was our 7th period art class. Not so much because it was art, although that did have something to do with it, but I always felt that I could be successful. And, I didn't have to worry about right or wrong answers and things like that. So the rewards that I felt, I was failing in school otherwise, but the rewards that I felt from that experience really helped me to continue to pursue education in spite of great odds for me. Now, at the same time, this neurochemistry that makes teenagers more welcoming of learning and embracing learning, it also makes them more likely to take risks. And there, again, this is a fine needle to thread because you want to encourage certain types of risk-taking behavior, but perhaps not others. Now, we can look at communication systems. Again, the growth of the limbic system enhances this, but childhood is when we begin to develop communication systems and to communicate effectively with one another. In adolescence, we actually refine these systems and we hone them. Although it may prove to be mysterious because I think we can sort of get a sense of what adolescent communication looks like when it's at home, and it tends to be, how's school? Fine. What did you do? Stuff. How's the stuff? Well, the stuff was fine. So even though they are refining communication, you may not always see it. So how does this all work? Why are, we talked about sort of the greater impact of neurochemistry, and we talked about risk-taking behaviors, and we talked about learning behaviors, but why now? Why not when you are a toddler or a young child? Well, we believe that it has to do with the importance of accumulating myelin, which is a white fatty substance to help neurons communicate more effectively. And it expands quite greatly, and it may help us to explain why teens are able to adapt and learn more quickly. It's almost that it sort of greases the wheels in some sense of the word. We know that gray matter, which is the part of the brain with synapses to help make connections, we know that part shrinks. So you have the white matter that is expanding, but the gray matter where you're sort of making all of the connections, we know that is shrinking. And that seems to be sort of counterintuitive. If the gray matter, which we know is incredibly important for learning, is shrinking, what's going on? Why are they learning, and why are they more adaptive? Well, I think what we found is that during adolescence, it's like the brain spring cleaning. So it's not that it's getting rid of everything, but it's really doing what we call pruning. It's making careful decisions about what's needed and what's not needed. And of course, with the white matter, we know that enhances learning, and the trimming of the gray matter allows those things that are most important to stick. And we know that it also allows things to run more efficiently. So it's almost like cleaning the gutters of the house, or rush hour, in other words, at the freeways. So what are some of the things that we can do to support the teenage brain and to support the adolescent brain? One of the things that we can do that is incredibly positive is to be able to create healthy risk-taking opportunities. Now, you know that at this age, the brain wants to take risks. The brain is hyper rewarded for risk, and we can actually present opportunities to engage in risk-taking that is healthy, risk-taking that is supported and supervised, and the idea of undertaking guided responsibility, where the parameters are set collaboratively versus sort of just taking unbridled risks. We know that these types of things to have our adolescents be able to be successful in these environments lead to improved self-confidence. So the idea is to provide opportunities to undertake more responsibility, but at the same time in a structured and guided way to support healthy risk-taking types of behaviors. Now, what we know is that there are some of the things that we really want to avoid and be vigilant of. Staying up later, it is certainly part of adolescence, but we want to be careful that sleep is certainly protected. And we also want to understand the root causes of sleeplessness. So remember, we talk about circadian rhythms, and we talk about the later release of melatonin than perhaps when you are an adult or when you are younger. So of course there's that, but again, when we have things in our lives like social media and friends calling and things like that, it also tends to contribute to sleeplessness. And we also want to make sure that when we are looking at problematic behavior patterns, that we don't reinforce them either consciously or that we are doing so by omission, that we're doing so because we are not aware. And it's really a matter of creating balance. So what I think you have here is an understanding of the adolescent brain. Certainly, we want to really talk about smartphone use. There definitely is a place for it. But remember, at this age, we don't really have a great ability to control. Certainly we have a great capacity to use, but little ability to control. So I think that's one area, and I think that also emerges quite naturally from some of the things we discussed before. And what you are seeing here these are questions that have been asked by parents. What can I do about smartphone use? When we talk about remote learning, and eventually the return to our middle school and high school campuses and college campuses, one of the things that we know is that the adolescent brain is desperate for learning experiences that are fast-paced, multi-sensory, that means involving all of the five, multimodal, and when I talk about multimodal, I mean different ways of knowing and experiencing, so auditory, visually, and kinesthetically by doing, and interdependent. So this idea of not only interdependence of teachers and students, where the relationship is not just going one way, but also looking at experiences that cross over disciplines. I mean, if you think about something like maybe even building a skateboard ramp that involves all of those things, kids are more likely to glom onto that than perhaps subjects in the abstract. So we have parents who will say, well, my kids are just not interested in school. I don't know what to do. And we know that this has been magnified somewhat by the transition to remote learning, especially in terms of meaningful interactions and opportunities to engage in these sort of fast-paced experiences. And what we tell our teachers, especially those online, is you got to pick up the pace significantly, and you've got to have opportunities for involvement. Look at sleep patterns and chronic sleep deprivation. I think we all know what that looks and feels like. We have parents who wonder what happened to my sweet little child. He or she always used to sort of, want my attention. We'd have wonderful talks and we'd have so much fun together. But do remember that this is not your fault and it's not their fault, although it is kind of their fault because that is their brains. But this is really where we find a drive towards independence and self-discovery. That is all part of the brain's want of learning. That is, taking the cognitive Porsche out for a joyride, learning by yourself. And cutting ties is a natural part of life. This does not mean cutting ties entirely, but again, sort of this idea of pruning in a way. And don't worry, they will come back to you. I was the worst of the worst as far as this is concerned. And I felt incredibly bad later in life, but did reestablish those connections after I was able to, meet the needs for independence and forward movement. You will see frustrations and anger. And the last time we talked about this, we talked about it in the context of the pandemic. And we talked about how tweens and teens had, unusually aggressive reactions to sort of small things. But this is not entirely to do to COVID, although it is amplified somewhat by COVID. This is also sort of learning to drive the brain. So there are new emotions, there are new chemicals that are being released. Well, maybe not new chemicals, but they're being released in different amounts. And so many times the emotions are complex and difficult for our kids to articulate. Sometimes it's just a matter of unbridled emotions. Now, back in my day during chariots and things like that, I learned how to drive on what they called a standard transmission. And that's where you actually had to shift the gears yourself and not with a paddle shifter, but you had to depress a clutch and move the gear shift around. And you'd grind a lot of gears. You'd really have sort of trouble finding out how to go and how to go fast. And that's sort of what we're experiencing here. Parents also often wonder about why are they so messy at this age? And it doesn't necessarily mean that it just happens. It doesn't, it's not like you turn 13 and all of a sudden your life is a mess. But with everything that's going on in the teenage brain, organization and tidiness is probably not a huge priority, as you probably know, but really sort of clamping down on organization and tidiness requires a lot of a sophisticated cognitive control. And this really, a lot of capacity is being used for other purposes. So it's natural. All of these things that you see, this desire for risk taking, this sort of learning quickly, sleep deprivation, going, to peers versus parents, and uneven reactions and constant change. It is really just part of learning how to drive. Now we sort of understand, I think, some of the issues, and we understand the geography and a little bit of the chemistry in the adolescent brain. In our next session, what we are going to do is we are going to leave the lobby, and we are going to actually look at adolescent behaviors and what might be done about them. And I will reassure you that if you think you are the only one going through this, I can promise you that you are not alone. my niece and nephew are hitting this age, and we see it. We see it on the long-term horizon. We see the changes almost like an ocean liner turning. So we're just waiting until it becomes a speedboat. So I'm going to take some time and open this for your comments, open this for your questions. I am going to put my address information up here, and I will ask our wonderful Miss Delgado to come back.
Thank you so much, Dr. Appel. We so enjoyed your presentation today. Oh my gosh, there were so many times that it was so relevant. And my kids are grown, but even though they grow up and they're like in their young 20s, they're still going through adolescence. It's everything you talked about. It doesn't really just ends by the time they hit 18. It continues on.
It doesn't even end by the time you are 50 in some cases.
True, so true. So I would encourage those participants, thank you for being with us, to post your questions on the Q&A. We do have a couple of them already.
Sure.
That that you can address right now. The first one's coming from an anonymous attendee.
Okay.
When a teen overreacts or gets mad easily, what can we do as parents and help them and help ourselves not to get at their level and get mad or overreact on their behavior?
And you know, it's so easy to do so. And actually, remember when we were talking about emotional intelligence and we were talking about recognizing predator behaviors and things like that. Now, I'm not saying it's anything to that extent, but it can be easy to get drawn in. It's easy to get sucked in. So in the back of your mind, you certainly have to remember that sort of the neuroscience of all of it, and remember that that overblown reaction, first of all, it's probably not due to what the teen is reacting to. It is probably not because you asked, what time are you going to be back? It is probably a sort of a kettle of angst, which has been boiling, and now you are hearing the whistle. So you are the unintended target of it. So it's important to remember that. It's also important to remember that teens are experiencing so many emotions at the same time. They have difficulty expressing it. You know, again, there's a lot of power. There's you know, it's fast and it's precise, but if you don't know how to drive it, it's just going to come out as pure speed. I think there are different ways of doing it. One is to sort of turn the spotlight away from the teen in terms of speaking about issues more objectively and not saying you did this and why can't you. That will make things go faster. That will supercharge the cognitive element of that. So I think one of the things you want to be careful to do is cut away the spotlight. You know, when people are angry, oftentimes what we want to be able to do is interrupt before you keep spooling up, because it's very easy to continue along that pattern. You know, certainly taking the spotlight off helps. You know, but I would not, and I think sometimes you just have to again, remember from our last sessions, sometimes, especially for teens, it's more important to be heard than reassured. So sometimes just listen and then bring the temperature down. Again, for these kids, they won't admit it to you, words come out of their mouths before they can stop them. And they will often say things that are overblown and excited. So sometimes you need just to have them run out of steam a little bit and then pick it up. But certainly, also another thing to think about is when the issue is emotional, appeal to the rational. And remember that our brains are almost equal parts rational and emotional. Speak in the abstract, appeal to the rational, and realize that, you know, you are sort of an unintended target. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Thank you, Dr. Appel. And as you were responding to that question, we've been getting more questions.
Good.
Yes, we've been getting more questions, and some of them are in Spanish, so I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to ask Ana to help out with translations, because I really want to do them.
Sure. And Ms. Delgado, did anybody guess, just out of curiosity, did anybody guess which one I was?
We had some guesses, and if you look at the chat, parents did guess, but I wasn't sure who you were, so you're gonna have to tell us your answer. Who were you?
Okay, I'm gonna hold on. I'm going to go back. Hold on, let me do this. And I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to show you which one I was. Okay, let me get to the picture. Now, parents, I don't know if you were able to guess, but if you see the young man in the red sweater, I am the one directly to his right. I am the one with a big blonde hair at the time. And this was a horrible, horrible issue of contention between my parents and myself. And that goes to, you were asking about, arguments with teens. Pick your battles. Pick your battles. Don't go all in for something small. I believe my mom and I probably did not talk for a month as a result of this fetching hairstyle. And for those of you who are asking, no, it is not a wig. And this was all done with a product called Sun-In. Some of you from my time may remember it. Just most of it fell out later. But okay, back to the questions. Ms. Delgado,
Ms. Delgado, we can't hear you.
Okay, let's see. She's saying, I can't believe that was you. Oh, Ms. Delgado, I don't
Okay,
think...
let me see if I can read a,
Okay.
I'm gonna read a question from the chat.
Yes.
It says, sorry, Ms. Delgado, we can't hear you.
There you go.
I'm gonna read a question from the chat. It's in Spanish. I'm gonna translate it. What difference is there between mental or cognitive development between male and female during adolescence? What is good or bad in these times? I'm not sure I follow. What is good or bad in these times to signal?
Okay, is the question there? Maybe I can, is it in the Q&A?
No, it's in the general chat.
Oh,
and it says, I'm translating it into English.
Okay.
Like, what things should we look for that are red flags in behavior? So there's two questions in one question. What is the difference in adolescent development between females and males? And what things should we look for that are red flags in these contexts? I imagine they mean pandemic and distance learning with regards to behavior, things we should look for, like depression, or how to prevent mental issues.
Sure, and a big question. I'll answer the first part first. We know that development tends to happen earlier with girls than with boys. You may see girls exhibit a greater degree of maturity, and we can see that that the brain growth traditionally happens at 11 for girls and 14 for boys. I mean, this isn't to say that every girl develops more quickly than every boy, but that is the general trend. Now, in terms of red flags in these times, generally it would be red flags anyway. Things like isolation, being cut off from family and friends, self-imposed isolation, a sort of a constant anger, really a roller coaster of emotions, just up and down, all of the time. I also think that parents, you don't necessarily need a clinical diagnosis. I think parents have a really good intuitive sensibility. So not undertaking things that they used to love to do before. Lack of, you're going to see lack of interest, and you are going to, and we'll talk about this next time, you're going to see your tweens and teens try on a number of different identities. And this is called homophilia, where they are looking for people who are like them. They're trying to find their tribe, as it were. So just because, your teens start dressing differently every month, they're just sort of trying to figure themselves out in a social context. But if they become withdrawn, or if they become isolated, and really just sort of divorce themselves from activities, I would say that would be a red flag. I think that it is probably more pronounced now, only because things are not as stable. I also think it's time to think about returning to the actual campuses of school. We have a longer run-up time, but remember, it wasn't going to remote learning that was problematic. It was the disruption of routine for which they were not prepared. So we need to start gearing up, because most likely all of the sort of the fear of missing out and everything like that, everybody has an idea of what it's going to be like to go back to school. And we have to make sure that we moderate expectations, because it's not going to be like going back in January of 2020. It's going to be different. So even though they may know that rationally, they're still thinking we're just going to go back to the way it was. There's going to be just dances, and there's going to be graduations and parties. So we need to be able to moderate expectations. We need to really get the other parts of teenagedom in alignment, so we can go back to school with our best feet forward. And when we meet next week, I'll be able to talk about that a little bit. And then in our final session, we'll look at not only preparing for college, but preparing for the return to school.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, you're back.
Oh, I'm back. Okay. I thank you so much, Dr. Appel. I so appreciate all the information, and we are here to listen and to learn. Thank you for joining us. Participants, we had 97, I think was our highest participants for the workshop today. So please let your friends and other parents know about our parent university. Please follow us on Facebook. We posted our link on the chat. All your questions that you post, we'll stay a little bit after if you want to post some questions on the Q&A. We will send to Dr. Appel so he can respond to them, hopefully before next Tuesday. And I will see everybody here on Tuesday. Anything else, Dr. Appel?
No, I'm seeing some great questions in the Q&A, so I'll be well prepared to answer those really very thoughtful questions. I'm going to just peek in the chat, and thank you very much, Mirna. That's very nice of you. Martisa, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Keep coming back. I may bring some pictures from my wayward teenage years, so you can try and figure out which one I am. It's always going to be fun and games at these. But as always, thank you for coming to Parent University. Thank you for inviting me into your homes and for spending an hour with me today. And we hope to see you all next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.